April 11th, 1941. Tobruk, Libya. The sun was a white disk, bleeding heat into the endless horizon. Dust hung in the air like powder smoke. From his observation post on the ridge near El Adim, Italian General Pietro Balbo squinted through binoculars, watching a column of British tanks crawl across the desert. "Carry Giocattolo," he muttered. "Toy tanks." Behind him, Colonel Lorenzo Gotti smirked. "They look like moving safes, General. Slow, clumsy. They'll cook inside before they reach our lines." On the desert floor below, the Matilda II infantry tanks lumbered forward at barely 15 kilometers per hour. Their tracks groaned. The engines strained. To the untrained eye, they did look archaic, squat, boxy, nearly comical beside the sleek German panzers that would soon join the fight. But to the men inside, they were lifelines. Inside Matilda number T.6849, Lieutenant Thomas "Tommy" Hale of the 7th Royal Tank Regiment wiped a line of sweat from his brow. The heat inside the steel hull was suffocating, nearly 60 degrees Celsius. The crew could barely hear each other over the roar of the engine and the metallic clang of treads on rock. "Driver, steady. Keep formation," Hale ordered through the intercom. "Copy, sir," came the muffled voice of Corporal Hargreaves, hunched over the controls. The desert shimmered. Ahead, Tobruk's defenses stretched like a scar across the horizon. Trenches, barbed wire, and anti-tank positions dug deep into the sand. Italian artillery was already opening up, shells bursting short, throwing up geysers of sand. In the Axis Command dugout, General Ettore Bastico, commander of the Italian XX Corps, leaned over the map spread across a wooden crate. "Rommel says these British tanks are obsolete," he said dryly. "He calls them steel coffins." A German liaison officer nodded, tapping the map with a gloved finger. "The Africa Corps will handle them. The 88s will make short work." Outside, the first engagement began. Shells screamed overhead, bursting against the Matilda's hulls and bouncing off. Lieutenant Hale's tank lurched as a 47mm shell struck the glassy plate with a sharp metallic crack. The interior filled with the acrid stench of cordite. His gunner, Sergeant Wallace, swore. "Hit front. No penetration." Hale smiled grimly. "Return fire." The 2-pounder gun recoiled with a thunderclap. Through the gun sight, Wallace watched an Italian M13/40 tank erupt in flames. Back in the command post, General Balbo lowered his binoculars, expression stiffening. "That can't be right," he murmured. "They're still advancing?" Another shell ricocheted off a Matilda's turret. Then another. The toy tanks kept coming, methodical and relentless, crawling through the storm of fire as if immune to pain. That night, under a sky veiled in desert haze, the Italian staff officers convened again. Reports flooded in. Forward positions overrun, anti-tank guns destroyed, morale shaken. The men whispered a new word, "Mostri d'Acciaio," steel monsters. But the generals still refused to believe. "They're slow. Tomorrow, we'll flank them," Gotti insisted. Tomorrow, they would learn what the Commonwealth soldiers already knew. Slow didn't matter when you were indestructible. April 12th, 1941. Tobruk's southern perimeter. The dawn broke red over the escarpments, a dust-laden sunrise that blurred the line between sky and sand. In the half-light, the silhouettes of Matilda and Valentine tanks crouched along the ridges like sleeping beasts. Beneath them, the trenches of the 9th Australian Division buzzed with life, bayonets glinting, tea boiling, the muffled rattle of Vickers guns being tested. Captain Alan "Dusty" Ferguson of the 213th Battalion knelt beside his men, adjusting the line of sandbags around their Bren gun nest. He looked up at the desert beyond, flat, unforgiving, and quiet. Too quiet. "You smell that, lads?" he said. "Petrol and arrogance. They're coming again." Moments later, the air began to vibrate with the hum of engines. German Panzer IIIs and Italian M14/41s rolled into view, advancing in neat, disciplined lines. Above them, the whine of Stuka dive bombers sliced through the wind. The ground shook as the first bombs landed, throwing up columns of sand that rained back down like ash. In the forward line, Lieutenant Hale's Matilda shuddered from the concussion. "Driver, forward 5 yards. Bring us hull down behind that ridge," he barked. Hargreaves obeyed, gears grinding as the tank lurched forward. An Italian anti-tank gun opened fire, 2 hits on the turret, 1 on the side skirt. Both failed to penetrate. Hale's crew felt the impact like hammer blows, but they stayed calm. Wallace swung the gun around and squeezed the trigger. The 2-pounder spat a shell that slammed into the gun emplacement, shredding men and sandbags in an instant. Overhead, the Stukas peeled away, chased by bursts of Bofors fire from Tobruk's defenders. The din was deafening, a cacophony of engines, explosions, and shouted orders blending into the symphony of modern desert war. By midday, Rommel's Afrika Corps, newly arrived, confident and untested against Tobruk's defenses, had joined the assault. Their tanks, faster and better armed than the Italians, darted across the desert like wolves circling prey. But they, too, met the same fate. At 400 meters, a Panzer III fired. The shell shrieked across the sand and struck a Matilda square on the front plate. It ricocheted harmlessly, spinning into the dust. The British crews answered with cold precision. One Panzer erupted in a tower of flame. Another's track was blown off, spinning it helplessly in place. Through the haze, General Erwin Rommel himself stood in his open staff car, goggles glinting in the sun. He watched as his tanks stalled, one by one, their armor useless against the British line. The Desert Fox clenched his jaw. "We underestimated them," he said quietly in German. "These are not coffins. They're fortresses." By evening, the Axis forces withdrew, leaving the battlefield littered with twisted metal and burning fuel. The stench of oil and death hung over the desert like fog. In the Commonwealth lines, cheers rose faintly, mingling with the crackle of fires. The Matildas, scarred and scorched but unbroken, stood like statues in the dusk. Lieutenant Hale climbed out of his turret, his face streaked with soot, and watched the retreat through binoculars. "Not bad for a toy tank," he muttered, half smiling. Yet everyone knew it wasn't over. The next assault would come with more fury, and this time, the enemy would adapt. April 14th, 1941. The desert around Tobruk smoldered like a forge. Smoke rose from wrecked panzers, their blackened hulks lying half-buried in dunes. Crows circled above the battlefield, silent except for the occasional crackle of fire eating through fuel lines. Inside the Axis forward command post, Rommel stood over a field table scattered with maps and reconnaissance photos. His khaki uniform was dust-stained, his gloves black with soot. Around him, Italian officers whispered, afraid to speak too loudly. 2 days, Rommel muttered. 2 days, and those slow British beasts have blunted 3 assaults. He tapped the map sharply. "This position, the western salient near the airstrip. We'll strike again here at dawn. But this time, we use the 88s. The officers nodded, though the Italians exchanged uneasy glances. The 88mm Flak 36, originally an anti-aircraft gun, had already proven its worth against tanks in France. But it was temperamental, hard to move, and required precision to be deadly. At first light, the Axis opened fire. The whine of the 88s cut across the desert like tearing silk. Explosions lit up the horizon, one after another, each shot hammering the sand where the Matildas had stood. The first shell struck a Valentine tank, piercing clean through. The crew didn't have time to scream. Lieutenant Hale's Matilda lurched as a near miss rocked the ground. The shockwave punched through the hull like a fist. "Those aren't 47s anymore," Hale growled. "That's heavier. Much heavier." "Enemy artillery, 2 o'clock, called Wallace from the gunner's sight. "Looks like anti-aircraft mounts." Hale frowned. "Clever devils." He radioed the nearby infantry, coordinating counter-battery fire. The Australians of the 215th fielded their 25-pounders with frightening speed. Within minutes, shells screamed back toward the enemy guns. But the 88s had already done their work. 3 Matildas burned, black smoke twisting into the morning sky. The desert trembled as one exploded, a dull, final thud that sent sand and metal raining down. Rommel watched through binoculars, lips curling faintly. "You see, even the thickest armor has its limits," he said. And yet, as the day wore on, he saw something that made his satisfaction fade. Even under bombardment, the British and Australian crews refused to retreat. The Matildas, crippled, smoking, sometimes missing entire tracks, were still firing. From his position, Captain Ferguson of the 213th Battalion saw one of Hale's tanks immobilized, He sprinted through open ground under fire, sand spraying at his heels. Climbing onto the hull, he banged on the hatch. "Tommy, you're hit bad. Pull out." Hale's voice came faint through the smoke. "Not yet. Not while there's a single round left." Ferguson jumped down as the Matilda's cannon fired again, the recoil shaking the air. A German panzer at 300 yards exploded in a burst of flame. The roar echoed across the desert, a defiant heartbeat amid chaos. By sunset, Rommel ordered a halt. His panzers were low on fuel, his men exhausted. The Desert Fox had learned that Tobruk was no easy prey. That evening, in the dim glow of his command tent, he wrote a terse note in his diary. "The British infantry tanks, slow, yes, but their courage and armor are formidable. The Italians underestimated them. I will not." Miles away, in the Commonwealth camp, the surviving tank crews gathered around the smoking ruins of what had once been their machines. Lieutenant Hale stood with Ferguson, gazing at the wrecks silhouetted against the setting sun. "They called us tin coffins," Hale said quietly. "Maybe they were right. But hell, at least we didn't rattle easy." Ferguson chuckled, lighting a cigarette. "And tomorrow? Tomorrow we dig in again." The two men stood in silence as the desert wind howled over Tobruk, a fortress battered but unbroken. In the days to come, the world would call it the Siege of Tobruk. It would last 241 days, a symbol of endurance, defiance, and the stubborn power of machines once mocked as toys. And somewhere in the swirling sands, half buried and scarred, the Matilda Tous and Valentines would remain, not as metal coffins, but as monuments to the men who proved steel and spirit could outlast even the desert itself.